been telling stories to schools for about 6 years now. And it all started one day when I was on a field trip with one of my kids. And we were stuck in traffic on this bus with 60 extremely rowdy and loud kids. And I had to find some way to calm them down. So I started thinking back to all my stories I've acquired over the years while traveling and living throughout the United States. And I spent about 7 years on the East Coast. And many of you know that the East Coast is filled with history, it's filled with ghost stories, and it was actually filled with lots of parties. And so my story today, we're gonna take back to the roaring 20s. It was a time of great happiness. The war just ended. Women were now allowed to vote, so people were constantly throwing parties in order to celebrate. So my story today takes place in New York City in 1920s, all right? Actually in Long Island, which is right outside of New York City. All right, and this story takes place in this mansion. And it wasn't always known as a haunted mansion. This mansion was on the water on Long Island, all right? And people would come from all over to be part of this extravagant party. The Jamesons were a very wealthy and high society family in Long Island. And they were known for throwing these elaborate parties where people would come and eat and drink and dance all night, all right? They would wear the best clothes, there would be the best music, the best wine and champagne would flow. There were butlers with those big tailcoats and those top hats that would walk around with trays, serving people anything their heart desired. So one night, the Jameson family, they were gonna throw this great party. He had just made a huge deal on Wall Street in New York City, and he wanted to spend money and celebrate. So he invited all of his friends over. And when I say all of his friends, I don't know if they were really his friends, but 100 people flooded into his house and they started celebrating. The music was going, they were eating and drinking. Well, midway through their party, a storm starts blowing in, but they're inside this giant mansion, so they don't even realize that there's a storm there and that the rain is pounding on the house, that the wind is blowing outside, when all of a sudden they hear this knock on the door. So the butler, that's his job, no one else is paying any attention to the knock at the door, he goes to the door and he opens it up. Well, standing there is this waterlogged lady. When I say waterlogged, this lady has been in the rain and she is dripping wet. All right, and she said, "Sir, it is cold outside. I'm dripping wet. Please, can you provide me some shelter for the night?" And the butler turns up his nose and says, "We're too good for the likes of you here. Go away." And she says, "Please, sir, please go ask the person who owns the house. If I could just get a few minutes and a towel to dry off, I'll be on my way." Well, the owner hears the butler talking and he walks over, Mr. Jameson. He looks at the lady and he goes, "You can't come in my house. I'm having a grand party. There's no way I'm letting the likes of you come into my house right now and ruin my party." So he slams the door on her. Well, a couple minutes goes by and all of a sudden the party hears this giant boom of thunder and this lightning strike and the lights go out. Well, the next day, now I'm fast forwarding to the next day, all right? So listen, the next day, people start to wonder what's happened at the Jameson house because all the people that went inside there cannot be found. And so the police department goes and they knock on the door at the Jameson's house and they go to open it and they look inside and it's pitch black and not a person is inside the house. Well, they spend weeks looking for all these, there was 100 people inside the house. They spend weeks looking for these people and they can't find one person after that one giant storm on that one night. And many people think because the haunted mansion was so close to the ocean that somehow there was a huge storm surge that went into the house and sucked everyone out. But then again, if that had happened, the house would have been destroyed and everything is in place exactly where it was and where it should be. So it's a giant mystery. Well, it starts to freak people out in Long Island. So people board up the house and the police department says no one's allowed to go in there. And for over 100 years, no one does go in there. It's been 100 years, all right? And that's where my story takes place. There's a group of teenagers in the area who had always been intrigued with this haunted house. They were locals. They grew up in this area, hearing stories about the haunted mansion, hearing stories that said, "Do not go there, otherwise you're gonna be sucked into the house and be locked in there." However, no one ever actually believed it until some new kids came into town and were told the story and decided they had to see for themselves. They didn't believe in ghost stories, and so they decided one dark haunted night that they were gonna go check out this haunted mansion. So people, it was just unspoken, we do not go in the Jameson property. Well, of course, teenagers, there was always around Halloween time when they would dare someone, "I dare you to go into the front porch. I dare you to go ring the doorbell." But no one actually ever pulled through because weird things seemed to happen. Lights would flicker, they would hear shutting of blinds, and so people pretty much stayed away. Well, there was two new brothers and sisters moved into the town, all right, and they were in high school, all right, and they joined this group of friends, and they didn't believe the hype about this house. People had told them, this house is haunted, don't go there, and this brother and the sister are like, I don't believe anything you're saying. I don't believe in ghost stories. I don't believe in haunted mansions. So they decided they were going to test their luck, and they were going to go one night when it was pitch black with a group of people from their school. They were going to go and they were going to knock on the door. All right, so there's a brother, sister, and they convinced two other people to go with them up onto this front porch and knock on the door. All right, and there was about 5 people waiting for them in the lawn that said, I'm not stepping foot on this property, you go ahead. All right, so it's about 10 o'clock at night, and these 4 people make their way up to the front porch. And it's one of those houses you would imagine. It's crickety wood. There's cobwebs everywhere. It's pitch black. This one beautiful house is now falling apart. And they go up to the front door, and then they knock, and nothing happens. And they're thinking, these people are scaredy cats. There's nothing to be scared of. And so they go, hey, people from the lawn, I dare you to go open the door and walk inside. You only have to stay inside, but I dare you to go inside for 10 seconds. They said, fine, I'm not scared of any little ghost. And so they open up the door, and they walk in, and all 4 get in there. Well, the minute all 4 have stepped across the doorway, the door slams. All right? The door slams. It's pitch black. And they try to get the door open, but the door won't open. It's like it's jammed. And so they start looking at each other. When all of a sudden they turn around, all the lights on the house flash on. And all of a sudden they start hearing music. And they look at each other, and they're like, what's going on? Well, they start looking around. There's not one cobweb. There's not one broken window or one floorboard out of the way that's been destroyed over time. The house looks immaculate. It's beautiful. There's music going, and they start looking around, and there's people in what looks like back in the 20s, they used to wear something called a flapper dress, and the most beautiful flapper dresses and black tuxedos you've ever seen. And there's about 100 people walking around, eating, drinking, and the music's going on. And the kids that had walked in are frozen still in their spot. And they look at each other and they're like, what's going on right now? When all of a sudden, the music abruptly stops. So it stops. And all 100 pairs of eyes turn around and look right at those 4 people who have walked over into the door and who stood at the doorway. All of a sudden, the lights turn off. The chandeliers start shaking. The floorboards start going up and down. And all of a sudden, they see people just start to walk towards them. And they're freaking out because now they see like a candelabra, which is like a candlestick. It is now coming towards them. People are walking in this trance towards them. This door won't open. The floorboards are moving. Now they see that the windows are cracked. They can't get the door open, and people are coming towards them, and they're freaking out. So eventually, they start pounding on the door. They see one of the windows is broken, so they hit it, and they all climb out to the window, and they all run out to the street. And when they get to the street, they turn around, they see lights on in the house, and they hear music, but no one can see anyone inside. So all the kids run immediately to the police station. They say, we know we weren't supposed to be on this private property. This is what happened. The police kind of roll their eyes, thinking that these are teenagers playing a huge joke on them. And when they get there, it's pitch black. They hear nothing. They see nothing. And they assume that these kids were just playing a prank on them and were just getting into trouble. And so they slosh them off and say, go back home. A year goes by. It's the same day. It ends up being the anniversary of the disappearance. And some other kids are walking by, and they look over into the haunted house, and what do you think they see? They see lights on, they hear music, and they could swear they see people dancing. But by the next day, if you were to walk by, the house is back to normal. It was pitch black, it was broken, and not a soul in sight. So it is said that this haunted mansion now comes to life on the anniversary of when those 100 people disappeared. It is said that, I don't know if I believe this, that on the night of the storm, when they were throwing that grand party and that woman came to the door, that she cursed them because they would not grant her entry. And that to this day, these people are stuck almost in time in this haunted house and they can't leave. So if you're in New York and you're on Long Island, and you go down the street and you see this old, what used to be a grand mansion, and it's sitting there falling apart, there's a good chance that's the Jameson Mansion, and that it may be haunted. Many people don't go up on the property anymore in fear that if they do, they'll be sucked back into time during that party, and they may never be able to get out. So I hope you enjoyed the story today. It's one of the kids' favorites. I lived in New York City for about 7 years, and I loved hearing about all the roaring parties from the 20s. I loved hearing about the history, and I loved hearing about all the different hauntings. And this is just one of them. So sit back because we'll have more of those stories to come in the future.